board member Amanda's over there. A couple of our great volunteers are here. I see Michelle, Danette, and Cecilia, our staff, are here. So we're going to load up today to learn, and we love our partnership with St. Vincent Healthcare over the years. We've helped them many years ago with organizing their collections. We've been helping Doug and his team, Tracy also with doing that again. They've done a beautiful job organizing their archives and telling the story of the hospital and its importance in serving the Billings community in the region. Anyway, without further ado, I'll introduce Tracy Neary, who will be the host of this activity. And again, I want to acknowledge also Community 7 TV. They're filming this, so if you find that you learn quite a bit, you can always reach back and watch this through Community 7. And we also archive all of those presentations as part of our collections too. So anyway, thanks. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you for the great partnership with Western Heritage Center. I had to laugh when you said
better light up there. I can't see.
We actually cannot because it alters everything else. So, that's for better light.
I appreciate the partnership with Western Heritage Center, although I had to laugh when you said St. Vincent has organized their archives, because that makes it sound like something's done. It is never done organizing. It feels like there are so many stories to be told, but we very much appreciated the partnership to help us on our journey to keep telling the stories in better ways that continue to engage people, because when we know that past, it helps us know who we are and certainly guides our future, and no one knows that better than you and your team here. So thank you for this lecture series as well, and to our friends at Community 7, thank you always for that time. Well, we're delighted to be here today. I'd love to introduce our panel to you. We are celebrating 125 years of ministry at St. Vincent Healthcare, so that's really inspired us to get more bold and more regular with telling our stories. So that is why we are just delighted to be here with you today and tell some of those stories. With me, right next to me here, is Sister Eileen Hurley. Sister is a member of the Sisters of Charity of Leavenworth religious community and has spent most of her life here in Montana. Grew up here and served in parishes across the state, including Geraldine and Denton, worked for the diocesan office, and has served with us at St. Vincent for a number of years on our board of directors, on our quality committee, and just about a month ago, she was recognized by the Montana Hospital Association as the Trustee of the Year. So we're really pleased to have her here with us. Next to Sister Eileen is Doug Shepard. Doug Shepard is a relative newcomer to Montana. He has quickly immersed himself in all there is to know about our history and really has been leading the work in our archives and even pulling this presentation together today. Doug is a chaplain, board certified by the National Association of Catholic Chaplains, has some great expertise in ethics, which is really important in our hospital systems, and also works with our caregivers around formation. How do we find meaning and purpose in work? At the end is Lynette Kosovich. Lynette also grew up in Montana, out in Lewistown, and I think she was a nurse helping her baby brothers with their boo-boos from the time she was born. It feels like nursing is in her blood. She started with us at St. Vincent in 1982, specializing in diabetes, I think, near the beginning, and continued into many other parts of the ministry, including the call center, which you'll hear a little bit more about, and then eventually leadership in administrative functions in the Human Resources Department. She really has a passion not only for people and compassionate service, but also a great eye for systems and processes, and has done some significant work at the state advocacy level, really changing the ways that we're able to access healthcare and mental health care across the state. So we are delighted to have Lynette with us. Besides all their professional accolades, all these people are also really fun. So I think you'll enjoy hearing from them and some of the stories that we have to share today. So I will hand off to Sister Eileen, who will begin with the beginning of the story.
Well, in the Gospel of Luke, we hear Jesus proclaim, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, to proclaim liberty to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim a year of the Lord's favor." Elsewhere in the Gospels, we also hear Jesus proclaim once more from the mountaintop, the Sermon on the Mount, where he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn, those who are meek. Blessed they who are sick and thirst for what is right. Blessed are the merciful, the clean of heart, the peacemakers, and those persecuted for the sake of righteousness. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter evil against you. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward will be great." Well, Jesus' words continue to live on today, in you and in me, in all who have gone before us, and many, many people today who continue to follow and to live these words fully. One of those people was St. Vincent de Paul. Now, you've heard of St. Vincent Hospital, St. Vincent de Paul Society, but there's much, much more that's part of the Vincentian family. But Vincent himself was born in a peasant family in 1580. Early in his life, he was determined not to be a peasant, not to be poor. He chose a career in the priesthood because that would lift him up and help him to move into higher society and to get to know the rich and the powerful. His charm and personal skills also worked in his favor on that as well. But a turning point in his life was when hearing the confession of a dying peasant. Now, this peasant was a member of the staff at the estate where he worked for the very rich. And this person was very uneducated, he was very simple, and he was very sick. But somehow in that experience, Vincent found a different call in life. The whole trajectory of his life changed. He chose then to give his life to the poor. His spirituality grew based on meeting the needs of the people then, rather than working for the very wealthy. So over the years, he established many different groups that would begin to respond to the needs of the most poor and sick, the orphaned and the widowed. One was the Confraternity of Charity, which is a parish group dedicated to meeting the long-term needs of people in their parishes or in their churches. With a few priests, he formed a religious community of men whose job then was to respond to the needs of the poor, but also to bring a spiritual life and new life and energy to people themselves. These are known as the Congregation of the Missions, or we call them the Vincentians as well. He also saw a need for the priests in the area to really grow spiritually, and so he began to share, to teach, to preach, to lift them up in their ministry and help it to make much more personable and help them to be able to respond to the needs that he also saw. And that became a lifelong work also of that Congregation of the Missions. With St. Louise de Marillac, they founded the Daughters of Charity to serve the poor, the sick, and the uneducated. Now, Vincent and Louise really had to say, they said, most religious communities at that time were cloistered, but their focus was that the convent was the sick room or the classroom, that the chapel was the parish church, and that the cloister was the streets of the city. Another group that he founded were the Ladies of Charity, They were a group of wealthy women called upon to respond to the needs of the poor, bridging that gap of the rich and the poor. And through a young man who really lived or discovered the spirit of Vincent, Frederick Ozenen, Frederick developed St. Vincent de Paul Society. So it was a century after Vincent that happened. So as you look around at all of these different, you could go online and see all this Vincentian family, because it even engages many more people. But those are the ones right now that we focus on. So with Vincent, there were so many people who have cared for the poor, the orphan, the widowed, because they saw the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual needs of people. They found ways to educate those who didn't often have an opportunity otherwise. He encouraged many individuals to give assistance to their neighbor, whether food, shelter, clothing, or love, just to be a presence, a listening ear, and a loving presence. He founded hospitals and orphanages, which continue to be founded and founded and founded today, as well as homes for the mentally infirm. He also ministered to prisoners and to galley slaves. He used to go down in the ships. It's wonderful to read his history because it was quite extensive. He invited so many people to walk that journey with him and continues to invite us today in that way. He was and is a person who lived a spirit of humility, simplicity, and charity, and invites us to do the same. One of my favorite sayings of his is, "The poor are your masters, and you are the servants." He died in 1660. We still live with that today. With roots in the spirit and guidelines of Vincent and Louise, many religious communities of Sisters of Charity arose throughout the world. And one of those is my community, the Sisters of Charity of Leavenworth, Kansas. From simple beginnings, the Sisters of Charity began with the wisdom and vision of Mother Xavier Ross. See her right up here. She was a Sister of Charity of Nazareth, Kentucky, who also ministered to people in Louisville and in that surrounding area, and eventually in Nashville, Tennessee. But from Nashville, she and a group of women were invited to come north. So in 1858, they boarded the riverboat, the stagecoach, and arrived in Leavenworth on November 11th. At that time, the Civil War was raging just to the south of them. But it was also the gateway, one of those many gateways to the west. So within a few weeks of their arrival, they were already ministering to the people at Fort Leavenworth, those who lived in the small town, and many of those who were moving west. They quickly established a school for boys and one for girls. They found a need immediately for a hospital to treat the wounded, but also the ills of people on the journey, and those who were orphaned along the way. And living with the spirit of Vincent and Louise, they worked to meet the needs of the people they encountered every single day. Gradually, their numbers grew because people saw what they did and wanted to be part of it. Thus, they were able to expand beyond Leavenworth to other areas in Kansas, but they remembered Father DeSmet asked them to come west. So, on September 29th, 1869, 5 sisters and a laywoman traveled by train and stagecoach to Helena, Montana. Now, if you read the history of the Sisters of Charity, that stagecoach was quite the trip. But they also arrived in Helena with no home because word had not gotten there that they were coming. However, a big mining camp, many men, a rough place. They began begging for money among the miners and other people that had settled there, and soon were able to open both a school and a hospital. In addition to the physically ill and those in need of education, the sisters also cared for the mentally disturbed. A decade later, when the treatment of the mentally ill was taken over by the territorial government, now remember, Montana wasn't a state yet, they opened an orphanage in a wing of the hospital where the mentally infirm had been. So the Sisters of Charity could really be known as operating the first insane asylum and the first orphanage in Montana. Again, once things began there, they were invited to other places. They branched out here in Montana, to Deer Lodge, to Virginia City. If you go to Virginia City, you'll find a building that says Sisters of Charity Hospital and Convent. That's in the 2nd Street to the south, way at the west end. But they also opened a hospital and were teaching in Butte in no time. And eventually, they came to Billings. And with that, I turn this over to the next person.
Well, picking up after the sisters arrived in Montana, a little further west, we get closer to Billings and our story from St. Vincent Healthcare. We are very privileged to have a history book that was put together around the 100th anniversary of our hospital by the late Dr. Sue Hart. Such a gift to us. She also served as a Sister of Charity of Leavenworth Associate, an associate of the religious community. So what a treasure to have so many of those stories captured. So we're going to share a few of those as we talk about the early history of the hospital. Kick it off with this picture. You see on the left there a drugstore. It was in downtown Billings, and it was Chapel Drug. It was there that Dr. Henry Chapel came to Montana from Canada in 1889, and he and his brother James opened this store. There they provided a little bit of medical care to the community, but quickly realized there were many more medical needs that were demanded. Dr. Chapel was also very civic-minded, and he became the first mayor of Billings. And in about that season, not the first mayor, he was the mayor of Billings, again in 1897, when Francis von Clarenbach came to town as a priest here in the community. It was those two that came to be confidants with each other. They talked about the needs of this growing community where the railroad was bringing more and more people, more and more in demand. And Father von Clarenbach had heard about the Sisters of Charity of Leavenworth from their works in the western part of the state, and knew that a hospital was needed, and believed that the Sisters of Charity of Leavenworth were just the ones to do it. Now, exactly how Dr. Chapel and Father von Clarenbach got the Sisters of Charity here, there are a few different stories. One of them included writing a letter to the community based in Leavenworth, Kansas. But the more romantic story has the two of them riding across horseback across the Wild West to get to Leavenworth to meet with Mother Superior Mary Peter Dwyer. Probably not very likely. Maybe they used the train. We're not exactly sure. There's a few varying accounts of how all of that happened. But what did happen was success in their efforts. Mother Superior agreed to come to Billings to send some sisters to see if they could indeed begin the work of building a hospital. Part of it was a promise from the community to provide $3,000 to help in that effort. So shortly after that first trip out to meet Mother Superior, she did indeed send sisters to the Billings community. It was in the fall of 1897, by all accounts, and two sisters, Theodore MacDonald and Antoinette Ayrton, both of whom would later serve as the superiors at the hospital, came out to the hospital. The two nuns were not only looking over the city of Billings, but also on the potential of the fundraising mission that would be needed to support the hospital. But on this visit, they found Dr. Chappell very critically ill. And he became pretty upset when he realized that his condition was giving the sisters pause to reconsider. Would they come here without a doctor if he did not survive? Would this effort be in vain? But Dr. Chappell told them, "If I do not live, someone else will help you. I know the county. I believe in its future. If you build the hospital now, it will be hard for a time, but I know your strengths. You do not mind hardship. And in 25 years," he said, "the sisters will build a Billings, a $250,000 hospital." Well, it wasn't quite 25 years. The sisters got quick work of fundraising, of working with the community, of gathering townspeoples. Many successive meetings endured, and indeed the community did step forward with about $25,000 to help build that first hospital there. We look at the laying of the cornerstone of that first hospital building, which was laid on August 7th of 1898. The first hospital was located on the corner of Broadwater and Division, right where we see Central Catholic High School now. That was the location of the first hospital. Many good stories, again, about why the hospital was placed there. It included consideration of the sisters being able to get to and from Mass without having to be impeded by a train to slow their progress back and forth at the hospital. It was also an area where many other parts of the early Billings area were beginning to get formed. We know that the Palmery Billings Library began in 1899, the Northern Hotel in 1904, the Moss Mansion shortly thereafter, and St. Patrick's Cathedral, again, was in 1905, just that groundbreaking there. And this part of this building that we're in right now, that same area, 1901. So just after that groundbreaking in 1898, right in this community, things were growing up all around it. Judge James Gross was the presider over the groundbreaking ceremony that day, and there's a great article from the Billings Gazette that talks all about, that had coverage of that very first day there. I was going to read a portion of it, but you're right, the light is a little dark here, and I'm not sure I will get all of the pieces, but I'll read a tiny little bit here. Again, from the Billings Gazette, dated August 9th, 1998. The cornerstone of the Sisters Hospital in the city was laid with appropriate ceremonies on Sunday afternoon, which will stand forth in the memory of each and every one that attended the same. The day was auspicious, and nearly 1,000 people were present to witness the ceremonies. He went on to say, "I look upon the erection of this hospital and others as but the embodiment and carrying out of the fundamental doctrine of the gentle Nazarene." And certainly it was a call to minister in the spirit of Jesus, in the spirit of Vincent de Paul, of Louise de Marillac, a reflection of the work of the Sisters of Charity that brought this cornerstone to life. It was only a few short years, not even a few short years, it was a few short months between the decision to build the hospital building and it actually being built. I think less than 9 months from we're doing this to it is open and open for patients. I laugh when I think about how long it takes to do anything in the construction world right now, and imagining an entire hospital in 5 months is a bit overwhelming. The first patient came February 2nd. At that time, the county was paying $2 a day for all the residents who lived in Billings to have health care there. Of course, the hospital took care of patients who were not from the county, and then the hospital, again, assumed the cost of all of those who did not have a source of payment, and certainly that very much continues to this day. We'll go to the next slide. The community continued to grow. Between 1899 and the building of the next hospital, we saw the introduction of motor cars, of a nursing school, of the polio epidemic, even Chief Pleniku, who came to be a patient at the hospital. It was, again, a lot of skepticism from the Native American communities about traditional health care in a hospital setting. But Chief Pleniku was a patient in April of 1923, and he came to have an x-ray taken of his right thigh, knee, and leg. And at that time, many Native Americans feared having their pictures taken, believing that their souls might be stolen when the image was captured on film. But his embracing of this traditional health care helped pave the way for better relationships between the Native people and the caregivers at the hospital. He would come again for cataract surgery at that time. Teepees were camped out on the lawn for the days that he would be there in the hospital. And all of this took place in the middle of one hospital winding up its ministry on the corner of Broadwater and Division, and this new hospital under construction. 1917 it started. We were in the middle of World War II.
World War I.
Sorry. We had great supply constraints to even finish the hospital building. So from the beginning to the end of completion, it was a 5-year process. The story goes that one of the sisters would drive back and forth moving supplies between the two hospitals in her Model T from Broadwater and Division to this site where the current hospital is now. This picture that you're seeing on the right is there today. Again, from over 100 years, still continuing to care for patients in the wings of those hospitals. Let me go to the next slide. Billings, right around this time, too, 1921, we boasted 15,100 residents in this city, right as the time that this hospital was here and being dedicated. It said that the railroad passengers would get off the train, and this 5-story building that took 5 years to make would catch the eye of the railroad passengers. It was the dominant landmark on the horizon, and you can see here a picture of that dedication on November 6th of 1923. And then a new era began. And I will pass off to Doug.
Thanks, Tracy. Thanks, Sister Eileen. And thanks, everyone, for coming out today. It's really an honor to be able to share another era that emerged in our history at St. Vincent Healthcare. And many of us refer to this era as the Allard years. Allard is a physician in our community, Dr. Louis Allard. And with the building of a new hospital came a new era with new service lines. And you can see in this photo of Dr. Allard his professionalism, but also his sense of leadership. You can see him there at Camp Tekakwitha. We'll talk about that camp in a moment, surrounded by other caregivers in his mission to advance orthopedic service lines, surgical service lines, and particularly his passion, which was to care for kids. Allard himself is from Montana. He studied at Montana State in Bozeman, went on to the University of Wisconsin there in Madison, and then studied at Rush Medical School in Chicago with some incredible pioneering physicians at the time. Dr. Charles Parker was one of those docs, as well as Dr. Brophy, who was a founding member of the Clinical Orthopedic Society, a prestigious society that has been with us now for over a century. But Dr. Allard's learning was rooted in what we might call some humble beginnings. Dr. Allard learned his mission by attending a small country school outside of Laurel, where he grew up, and there he quickly learned what it meant to be a defender of the poor. Dr. Allard was that kid who spoke a little bit differently in class. His mother was French, his father was French-Canadian, and he quickly earned the nickname Frenchie by his classmates. So it was those early years as a child that he learned not only fortitude to persevere under the ridicule of others, but he also learned the value and power of compassion, not only for himself, but also for those around him. And this is really demonstrated in one of his classmates that he attended school with. His name was Stinky. So Stinky merited this name because of some of his body ailments and then also his home life as well. He was motherless, and he had many brothers and sisters, and his father himself was poor, couldn't hold down a job, and they shoveled from house to house, whether it was a shack or a dugout or back again. But Louis saw Stinky as a person, and he befriended him. And he sat with him for 10 years as a classmate. And as Stinky grew up to be a responsible citizen and a young man, he never forgot the boy, Louis, who saw him for who he was as a human being. And it's this lens or optic that I want to talk about, this pivotal player and his lens, his optics of providing care as a physician, which was to see the human person. So I'd like to share 3 quick examples. The first example comes after World War I, 1919, and the Spanish flu roared through buildings like a lion. And the hospital was so overwhelmed beyond capacity that we had to open up a makeshift hospital in the community at the local high school. And Allard himself, who was the county physician at the time, was so overworked that he himself contracted the flu. He got double pneumonia, and he went unconscious for a period of 3 days. But it was during this time that it was recorded and witnessed, in his state of delirium, his focus, which was not upon himself, even in his sickness, but upon others. And it's recalled him praying and mumbling for mothers of those children whose lives he was not able to save. After 3 days, he regained consciousness. He inquired about his family, and all were made well. Truly an ecstatic man, one who stood outside of himself, who is truly a man for others. Next slide, please. The second example comes out of the St. Vincent Hospital School, which you can see to your left there, which was the original hospital that was built. And it was transformed into a hospital school where children were able to receive holistic care. Kids with polio needs, orthopedic needs, crippled children who normally wouldn't be able to attend school were invited to come and to receive not only physical nourishment, but also mental nourishment, emotional nourishment, and to flourish and to grow up as kids. There's even a camp that was in Red Lodge, Camp Tekakwitha, and we'll look at that in just a moment. But this example of living for others and seeing the human person was born out of a beautiful friendship. And you can see her pictured next to Dr. Allard there. To his left, on the far left of the picture, with the children, Sister Alberta Lee, Sister Arcadia Lee. And Sister Arcadia was a good friend of Louis, of his wife Harriet and their family. And she herself was a widow. She had lost a son and decided to find herself by losing herself in serving others in the vocation of nursing. And it was in that sense of calling to care that she encountered the Catholic faith, and then she became a Sister of Charity of Leavenworth, and then was assigned to Billings and was the head of the nursing program. She was a magnanimous woman and an incredible leader and a beautiful friend. And it was out of this friendship that Dr. Allard and Sister Arcadia saw a need. It's just a simple need that they saw in the community. And they lived the question together, how can we meet that need? And so what started out as just this humble clinic at the original hospital with a shoestring staff and a couple of volunteers then developed to become a nationally recognized model of care for children in the country. Over 4,000 children were cared for from 1923 to 1939 at the St. Vincent Hospital School. And good news travels really fast, and it travels really far. And the good news happened to get across the pond all the way to the ears of a Pius XI in Rome. And a delegation was sent to Billings, and in January of 1931, it was a snowy day, there was a procession that was made through the streets to St. Patrick's Cathedral, and it was there that Dr. Allard became Sir Louis Allard, and he was knighted into the Order of St. Gregory the Great. For Dr. Allard, this was the pinnacle of his career as a physician. And so much so that if you visit his cemetery, his grave marker in Laurel, where he's buried, I believe his grandfather gave that land there, you can see etched on his gravestone the image of that very medal next to his wife Harriet. And we, as a hospital, are honored to have that medal on display, thanks to the generosity and partnership with Western Heritage Center. And it's just one of the many ways that Allard's life continues to bear witness to each of us, to call us to live for others and to follow that call of charity that begins with Jesus and continues to live throughout with St. Vincent de Paul, St. Louis de Marillac, the Sisters of Charity of Leavenworth. And you and I today, right? Next slide, please. This is such a fantastic photo. This is a picture at the lodge at Camp Tekakwitha, there in Red Lodge. And the third and final example of Allard's life being just this pivotal player really comes from one of his patients, who I'd like to just mention. You can see him centered there. He's about 14, 15 years old. Bruce Milne is his name, and also Sister Mary Agnes Stein, who is also off to the far right pillar. Bruce had a sports injury when he was a young man, and it was an orthopedic injury that turned into chronic osteomyelitis. He had bone marrow abscesses that developed, and he lived with this for about 7 years. And he stayed at St. Vincent Hospital School for about 4 years, from 38 to 42. And he grew up to become a lifelong educator. And towards the end of his life, he wrote a book of poetic memoirs called Angels, Cripples, and Culprits. And he wrote it in 1998, shortly after Sister Mary Agnes Steiner went into eternity. And this book is a recollection of his experience as a patient and as one of Allard's kids. And I would just like to read one of the poems that he wrote of Sister Agnes Steiner. It's called Sister Beautiful, Sister Agnes. Sister Agnes was so beautiful, with features fine and trim. Her smile would bring me joy on the gloomiest of days. Young she was for a nun back then, not too much older than I, and I must admit the love I felt was a bit romantic at times. Yet the love I knew and remember now is of radiant beauty that came from the unhurried, devoted care she gave with that smile and tenderness. How many times she sat and prayed beside my bed in dark of night, that I would live and suffer not, that I would grow to be a man. A man I am today, and she served for many years. But if I ever had a second mother, it was that devoted, caring nun. So to summarize in brief Allard's work, his life, his teachings at St. Vincent Healthcare, I'd like to use his own words that he shared in the early 20s, shortly after his sickness. He said, quote, "Service without sacrifice is not God's work, and it will not endure," close quote. Allard, Uncle Louis, continues to call each of us at St. Vincent's Healthcare to concretely live the question, how can I serve today? Which leads us to the backbone of St. Vincent's, which is our nurses. Lynette?
Well, it is pretty fun to talk about nursing. It's been a long time since I've actually been able to care for a patient, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of nursing at St. Vincent's, and if I had to title this, it would be, "You've Come a Long Way, Baby." And I also, I drew a lot of my work from The Call to Care, the book that Sue Hart had written. And as you've heard before, the hospital was established in 1889, and I'm gonna jump into the decade which they actually called the busy years, which was 1910 to 1920. As you heard before too, the population had nearly doubled during that time, and it was very apparent that they were going to need more healthcare workers. And what did that mean? What it meant was there needed to be a school of nursing started. And Sister Mary Corona Harrington was the one who was charged with overseeing this in those early years. They started very small, mainly because the space was small and they really didn't have a lot of staff members. But they built a state-of-the-art nursing home. They called it the nursing home. And it cost about $6,500 at that time, and it was by the original hospital, where Billings Central High School was. They called it a most beautiful building with all modern conveniences and ample room to make very comfortable quarters. So you're going to hear a theme throughout all of this, that the Sisters of Charity and the people of Billings were always on the cutting edge and very innovative about the things that they were trying to do to make this community better. So they admitted their first students way back in 1913. And by the way, there was lay nurses before this. In fact, one of our most famous or notorious nurses that we had here in this area was Calamity Jane. So she, of course, never went to school, but she called herself a nurse, and she nursed her fellow human beings. The students were selected, quote, for training after critical inspection relative to moral, physical, and mental qualifications. Now, this is really interesting. I was so fortunate to go into the archives. There is a 4-drawer file cabinet there that has every single application and educational record of every nurse that went through that school. And the very first application, and I'm not kidding, it was a folded piece of paper like this. And these are the questions that they asked to make sure that people had the moral, physical, and mental qualifications. Your name in full. Where are you from? Single, married, or widowed? Age? Where educated? What religious profession? And this person was Methodist. Any physical defects? She said no. Present occupation? She was a dressmaker. Have you ever been employed or in a training school before? She also said no. These are my favorite next two questions. What is your height and what is your weight? And then they signed it. And this application stayed true for about a decade and a half. And then it was only augmented after then by a narrative page that they had filled out in the back page, and that application went all the way to 1973. Interesting, one of the things they asked is, why do you want to be a nurse, of course? And most of them said, I want to care for people. A lot of them talked about the ministry that they had seen already demonstrated through the Sisters of Charity and what had been built here. The last question was, what do you intend on doing after your graduation? And the majority, I looked through so many applications, the majority of up to about 1968 said, I want to be a nurse and raise a large family. So it's pretty interesting just to go through those applications. They were paid $6 a month, 20 cents a day. They were allowed a half day off on Sundays. And this was consistent just about through their entire schooling and through most of the years that I looked at. It was a very rigorous schedule and curriculum to get through. 2 years after they started the school, the state of Montana decided there was going to have to be a registration process, meaning they had to go through a test, we call it the State Board of Nursing test, to make sure that they were proficient in the skills that they'd been taught during the school. St. Vincent's was the first one to sign up for that. They believed that the education was of high quality and it was time to prove it through a certification also. Then in 1918, of course, now we're talking about war years again. With World War I, the school was actually notified by the National Council of Defense and asked, can you please increase your enrollment? We need a lot of nurses. And so in those 5 short years, they went up to 26 nurses. The very first year, I didn't mention this, there's 5 applications in the drawer, only 3 graduated. So they did start small, but they ramped up pretty fast. Then the next really probably momentous thing that happened is when Marillac Hall was built in the 40s, and it opened in 1947. It had a main floor that the sisters occupied, and then the other floors were occupied by the students. And the description in the book is lovely. On the main floor, in the parlor, there was a chandelier that was donated by Dr. Allard for the nuns, and it was absolutely beautiful. And to this day, it still hangs, apparently, in the parlor in Leavenworth, according to the book. I don't know if it's still there or not. The 40s were really trying. You've already heard about needing mental fortitude and physical stamina, but it was really tough because they were in war years again. I read a passage where one nurse that came back, who graduated in the 40s, she came back for a reunion, and she said, we called them the no years. There was no disposable supplies, no organized volunteers, no nurses' aides, no LPNs, no cafeteria, no electric beds, no. And she said it was really rigorous, and they had to work very long hours. And again, once the innovation and the forward thinking of the organization showed up when they decided that they needed to institute a cadet nurse corps. Many of the RNs were actually called up to serve in other ways. And they went through a very abbreviated and a very intense training to become semi-nurse substitute. There were so many of these nurse corps that popped up that they needed to have they had to take an oath to be in the cadet nurse corps. that they would, nationwide, they would play the oath on the radio, and the candidates would stand in front and repeat the oath because they couldn't get the right personnel in front of them to do it in person. I thought, wow, that's pretty edgy. But other things that happened in the 40s that were more positive, the miracle drug came around, antibiotics, penicillin, and also plastics. And if you can really think about this, back then there was no disposables. They washed bandages. I worked with nurses when I started back in 1982 that remember sharpening the needles of the syringes. That was part of their duties. And also in the 40s, they received the very first iron lung, and it was donated by the Elks Club, and it was the only one in a 250-mile radius, which pretty amazing when we'd seen the resurgence of polio during those times and the need for that. And then in 1946, there was kind of a massive change in how the nursing students in the nursing school operated. An affiliation was made with Carroll College, and that meant that the nursing students that were at St. James in Butte, St. John's in Helena, and here would actually do their first 2 years of nursing school at Carroll College. They would get pre-nursing and they would get general eds, and then they would go back to the respective hospitals and do their clinical work, which was a model that evolved in what we really know today in most cases. The 3-year nurse, which this was in the past, is now really changed to a bachelor's prepared nurse with more academic focus on the front end of their training. In the 60s, there was a pretty massive shortage of nurses. And as I looked back, it's pretty interesting. It seems like about every 20 to 22 years this shows up, this massive shortage of nurse. I was one of them. I grew up in central Montana, and I had an interview at both St. Vincent's and Deaconess on the same day. Came up here to come to the big city and start my nursing career. And it was very apparent when I spoke with the nurse managers that there was a shortage. Everyone wanted you in their department. And I can remember walking into St. Vincent's, and there was this what I called this spirit that was kind of energizing, and my decision was made for me very rapidly because I wanted to have a piece of that. I did not know what that was. That was a mission, and I'd never been exposed to a mission before. And as I spent 25 years with St. Vincent's, grew to love that mission and knew that it truly was a call to care that I had never experienced anywhere else in any other time in my life. But one of the things they did during this nurse shortage time is St. Vincent started a nurses aid program. And I can tell you from experience as an RN, some of the best training I ever got was from a nurses aid. They knew their stuff. I probably should have been a nurses aid, actually. I don't know. But they had 10 to 12 students that would join them every quarter, and the students paid $5 in tuition, and that took care of their textbooks and their supplies, and they actually got paid also. When they were in training, they got 75 cents an hour, and when they completed their training, it moved up to 90 cents an hour. That was, it's interesting how the wages changed over the years. I remember to this day, my very first wage as a nurse was $9.99 an hour, and I think the minimum wage at that time was $2.37 an hour. I thought I was rich. I mean, it was so fun. And then in the 70s, there was more innovation that came and forward thinking, and one of the most controversial things that happened at St. Vincent's that the nurses strongly opposed was allowing dads in the delivery room. And it came to a head where an executive meeting had to be called to make a decision whether that would happen or not. And it was decided it would happen. It was pretty quickly, everybody acclimated to it now, and now you wouldn't even question it, right? Pretty interesting. And also in 1971, the first diabetes center in Montana was established. I was very fortunate to be part of that, and I worked alongside two of the best nurses I've ever worked with, Janie Mazaris and Gail Staley. And we three were some of the very first certified nurse diabetic educators in Montana. We held clinics every month, and it was just really fulfilling to help people manage their own chronic disease. And to this day, I still run into patients that I taught them how to do their own injections and stuff like that. It's very, very fulfilling. And then the 70s were also a little difficult because in January of 1973, it was announced that the nursing school would close. Part of that was, academia really was taking over with a 4-year degree. It was a heavily subsidized program for St. Vincent's, and the tuition reimbursement just didn't really exist in that kind of program. So it was a very sad day when they graduated that class in June that it was finally closed forever. Also, you might remember this too, but in February of 1979, the Health Flight program started. We were the 10th program in the nation to start, and part of that was we have a very rural community. And to have that golden hour when we could get help to the patient that was injured or ill and get them back to our hospital was critical. Very successful program. Well, let's go to the 80s. It doesn't seem that long ago, does it? It's 35 years ago. We didn't have internet. We had some very forward-thinking administrators that said, how can we help the community, which this has been a thread throughout this entire history also. How can we be a good partner to the community? One of the administrators said, have you ever heard of this model of a telephonic nurse? And everybody kind of shrugged their shoulders and said, not really. And that was the implementation of Ask a Nurse. It was a 24/7 telephonic program where nurses sat in front of a computer, and pretty rudimentary computers, but a vast library of resource books that they could pull down in a second and look it up, and help people self-guide to better care. I was very fortunate. I got to oversee that program for 15 years. And at its peak, we had 45 employees. Most of them were nurses in a large call center. And unbeknownst to many people, we were in 4 states and in 10 cities. If somebody from Sheboygan, Wisconsin called, they're Ask a Nurse. They got a nurse in Billings, Montana, that would know how to get them from their hotel at the Super 8 in Sheboygan to the hospital in Sheboygan. I mean, if they would ask us if we were sitting there, we would say no, but our nurses were so well trained that they could give anybody directions in any community. They could say the doctor's names right. We had phonetic lessons. And I was actually there when we took our 1,000,000th call. 1,000,000 calls. As a young mother, I used to Ask a Nurse when I was off duty. But then with the advent of computers and this thing called Google, people became a more informed healthcare consumer that way. But it was one of the ways that St. Vincent's really felt was a good way to serve the community. In the 2000s, many of you probably remember when Hurricane Katrina hit. It was devastating. We in Montana felt the pain of those people in New Orleans. And once again, our administration called down to the people that they knew in New Orleans and said, how can we help? What can we do? Our community was big. Our community is sometimes the entire United States. And they said, we need nursing aides, and we need nursing aid instructors. We have all of these nursing homes that were devastated, and our employees' homes were devastated. We need workers. And I'll never forget that. We immediately just jumped on it. We got the Board of Louisiana's nursing aid certification requirements to see what we needed to do. And by the way, at that time, we had a certified nurses aid program at St. Vincent's because we were growing our own too. And I'll never forget, we gathered in the chapel for a blessing of hands before we sent 2 instructors and 3 nurses' aides down there for a 2-week stint. They came back, we sent another group down there, and it just showed how our community is really the world, and demonstrated to this day. You'll still see it. The other thing that happened that was pretty innovative during those years, we brought the Ronald McDonald Caramobile to town, which took care of underserved children or uninsured children to help them with their dental care and also with their medical care. And the Ronald McDonald Charities helped us acquire that because they wanted a rural model. And our original mission was to get it out into all the contiguous counties. And it was shocking to find out that we could hardly get out of the borders of Yellowstone County because the needs were so great in our own community. And that really launched a lot of other children's programs and here at St. Vincent's, and it traveled down the road for many, many, many years. And in the mid-2000s, 2005, the nurses actually, for Nurses Day, wrote a book. And it was a book by and about nurses called Love, Care, Hope, Cry. And I'm going to read you just a very short poem of one of the nurses who to this day I just admire. She's retired. Scotty Batiste. And if you ever were lucky enough to have her as an ER nurse when you had an emergency, you know why I say that. She wrote a poem called Unsung Heroes that was published in that book. See the exit signs in Allard, open up the door. You may receive a sense of those who've gone before. Yes, unsung heroes walk these halls and their spirits fill this place, giving inspiration that time cannot erase. I think she captured really the spirit of St. Vincent's in that. So let's look at today. There's 98 different types of certifications that a nurse can get. Everything from a certified camp nurse to a certified ICU nurse to a certified information nurse. So I'm so happy to be part of this profession that really helped the success of St. Vincent's. And it's a profession that's opened windows to so many young people and continues today. And the one thing that has followed me throughout all my careers, from the very first time I stepped through those doors at St. Vincent's, was Mother Xavier Ross's quote that I think about it a lot. It says, "It is wisdom to pause, to look back and see by what straight or twisted path we've arrived at the place we find ourselves."
Thanks, Lynette. We'll add maybe just 3 more thoughts as we go forward from today. You may know that part of the new chapter of who we are is an integration with Intermountain Health. We are now 66,000 caregivers in a new organization, and it's a new chapter for us. On the next slide, you'll see the footprint of where we're serving now as part of this larger organization. And I think we're just going to go to the last slide, Kevin, if that's okay. One of the really innovative things that happened was really thoughtful discernment by the Sisters of Charity of Leavenworth around this merger and the importance of continuing to serve our original mission, to continue to be a ministry of the church, which we will be. All those protections in place, all of who we are from those founding sisters, from Vincent and Louise and Jesus, calling us to serve those that are poor and vulnerable, to respect the dignity of human persons, to help people flourish in their lives, are still who we are and still who we are called to be. One of the things that we are most excited about in our next 125 years, in addition to the many stories of service and that sacred encounter that happens between each person and each patient, we are also looking forward to new technology in a new space. You may have heard that we are beginning construction of a new hospital building here to take us to the next 125 years, and you can see some of our building being more than 100 years old. It is definitely the time in the season for that. So forgive our mess on 27th Street as we make ready some of the ground for that space, but it's certainly a place that we hope will usher the next 125 years of service. And Lynette shared that beautiful quote from Mother Xavier Ross. The last one we'll share, that Eileen shared at the beginning as well, is that we're just called to look forward to the good that is yet to be. It's been an amazing 125 years with more stories than we could ever capture. And we know there are many good stories yet to be. So thank you for your time today. We invite you to visit our archives every first Monday afternoon. We'll meet in the lobby at 1 o'clock. And again, happy to tour you if those times don't work as well. But thanks for the time today, and blessings in your future.
Anybody has any questions, or? Pretty satisfied, aren't you? That's good. That's good. Thank you so much.